Hi, welcome to From Ideas to Products, Prototypes, and MVPs, a workshop in the Startup UMD workshop series. I'm actually recording this after the fact since I forgot to hit record on the video. And so I'm just giving a quick introduction here for the YouTube channel. There will be one slight edit in the middle of this as we jump back in. We've just missed the beginning of Kevin's introduction, but wanted to also give you the background of why we do these workshops and where this fits in the startup process. My name is Josh Doing, and I'm the Startup Support Manager at the University of Maryland's UM Ventures. This workshop is, like I said, part of our ongoing Startup Fundamentals workshop series. This series is offered by UM Ventures with collaboration from the Maryland Technology Enterprise Institute and the Damon Lamone Center for Entrepreneurship at the University of Maryland. There will be some Q&A. As you can tell, this session has been recorded. But we are really excited to have participating with us a pair of panelists, Kevin Arum and Abhishek Mutayed. But I'm going to save their intros for a second and just kind of explain a little bit about UM Ventures and why this workshop is happening. UM Ventures is for innovators in either the sciences or the humanities who are passionate about their research and would like a low-risk opportunity to transform it into a product or service to benefit the public. We work with researchers or graduate students across campus who have developed innovations and technologies that they'd like to take out of just the research sphere and actually turn into a commercial product, basically a product that is out in the real world, making a difference and creating value for customers and end users. We work from the disclosure of that idea through the IP protection of that idea, all the way through licensing and hopefully getting that idea into the hands of an organization that can create it and test it and again, get it used by people out in the real world. And today's workshop specifically is about the process of turning that idea into a product, how we go about doing that. At UM Ventures, we've developed the Startup Guide, which you can find at startupguide.umd.edu. It's kind of a game of life game board to help you understand the startup process. It's got a variety of different steps. They don't have to be followed in this exact order, but this is kind of just the way we like to conceptualize it and frame it for folks. But there are four main categories. There's the feasibility assessment, the startup formation, startup acceleration, and sustainable company. And so we start at feasibility assessment, where there's telling us about the innovation, connecting with mentors, engaging in customer discovery, developing business skills. And then there's the startup formation, where you actually start a company, build your management team. And one of those steps right here is developing an MVP or prototype, which is why we have this workshop today to talk about what an MVP or a prototype is. And so our two panelists today, like I said, are Abhishek Mutayed and Kevin Arum. Let's start with Kevin is a senior engineer in the Fischl Institute for Biomedical Devices. A graduate of both UMD and UT Austin, Kevin had to teach himself many new skills needed to build a portable medical device, including fabrication, microcontroller programming, and circuit board design while earning his master's degree. After graduation, Mr. Arum spent more than a decade developing several medical devices and applications within the Department of Surgery at the University of Texas Health Science Center in Houston, ranging from portable resuscitation devices for austere environments to 3D printed models for surgical planning and bioreactors for cellular therapy applications. As a member of the Fischl Institute team, Arum's area of expertise are mechanical design, rapid prototyping, medical imaging, segmentation, and biomedical instrumentation. He'll be sharing with us kind of the MVP and prototyping from the development side, specifically from an institution here at the University of Maryland that's designed to help people within the university system. Then Abhishek Mutayed, we invited him because he's coming at this from the side of industry, from a company that has developed MVPs and worked with customers and consumers on what an MVP has to teach them. Abhishek is a scientist turned entrepreneur with nearly 15 years of experience in the field of semiconductors. An alumnus of the University of Maryland, Howard University, and the University of Calcutta, Abhishek received his PhD in electrical and computer engineering from UND in 2007. He was an assistant research scientist at the Institute for Research in Electronics and Applied Physics when he founded N5 Sensors in 2012 to commercialize a hybrid sensor technology developed at UMD. The sensor technology utilizes innovations in nanoengineering to produce chip-scale microsensor arrays that can detect various toxic and hazardous gases present in air. As CEO of N5, he spends his time formulating business strategies, ensuring exceptional product quality for customers, and continuing to build a growing partnership and sales pipeline. One of his favorite roles as CEO is to work alongside the N5 team to make sure they have everything they need to execute on their vision, a safer world through mass adoption of environmental sensors. And with that, I'll pass it over to Abhishek and Kevin. Just one note before I do that. Kevin is part of the Fischel Foundry team, which is part of the Fischel Institute for Biomedical Devices and is specializing in medical device prototyping, design manufacturing, regulatory guidance, and basically just commercializing the medical device space. There's a lot of different work that they do. And again, if you're interested in working in that field, we encourage you to reach out to them. But with that, we'll go back into our regularly pre-recorded conversation with Abhishek and Kevin. Same question to you. Tell me, yeah, quick elevator pitch of N5 sensors, and then, why are you here? Why are we asking you about prototypes and MVPs?
Thanks, Josh, for having me here. My name is Abhishek Matat. I'm the CEO and founder of N5 Sensors. So N5 Sensors, what we do is we keep people, businesses, communities, and critical infrastructure safe from all kinds of environmental threats and hazards. And we do this by advanced sensor technologies, AI, and real-time data fusion, and then essentially providing real-time intelligence to people to take the actions they need to keep themselves safe and protect the critical infrastructure. So the second part of your question is why I'm here. So I did my PhD in electrical and computer engineering with focus on advanced semiconductor, device designs, testing, whatnot. And, the core of the company's sensor technology was actually my sort of post-grad research, right? And I used to work for University of Maryland as a research faculty, first as a postdoc, then a research faculty. And also, parallelly, I used to work as a guest research scientist at National Institute on Standards and Technology. So after my PhD and throughout my PhD and after that, I really was focusing on designing advanced sensors, right? So after I was done, so when you say sensor, it's like the component, right? One single fundamental physics, simple thing that you're designing takes years and years and years. And then when I decided to sort of like, transition and look for other career opportunities, pathways, I decided to start this company. Of course, the vision was to, bring a solution utilizing this sensor technology. And what it ended up doing is creating a complete like end-to-end solution, taking the sensor technology, which is we consider like almost like a physical science, to a full end-to-end system, right? So right now, and if you don't mind, I was going to just show one kind of quick image, and that kind of would capture the essence of what I'm trying to do here. It's I was just like why we are doing what we're doing here. So let me just show one, simple image. So this is kind of why I'm here, right? So when company was in the early days, this is the prototype, right? You can see probably a slide that I'm showing. Early days, it was a
Can
breadboard.
people see Abhishek's slide? Okay.
Yeah. It was just, like you had the sensor technology, but how do you prove or how do you demonstrate the value of the sensor technology? This is like a microscale chemical sensors that can detect like a whole bunch of toxic environmental, industrial chemicals. How do you show to people that this tiny devices that can fit on like a 1 by 1 millimeter semiconductor chip can do like 10 different things? So we started showcasing that using this. As you can see, it's a quick duct tape, all that, putting it in a board. But today, we actually sell a commercially available system. As you can see, it goes on poles, handhelds. It's just not the system, like the hardware itself, but it actually has a cloud infrastructure, software to visualize the data, all of that built in. So as a CEO, I also kind of like work on the strategy and visions of the company, product portfolio, how we're going to roll out, how the customer is going to use it. So this is where going from a concept to prototype to MVP to fully, in production, how things look like. So I have done, all of that for the company. So I guess that's why I'm here. So
Awesome. Thanks. So back to Kevin real quick. We've kind of so far used both these terms, prototype and MVP. And I don't want to like get like too semantic or whatever, but are these completely interchangeable, or is there at one point where a prototype becomes an MVP? Like what is the difference, if there is a difference between these terms?
I think prototype is something that you can describe a little bit earlier in the process and where you're going to be iterating quite a bit. And you sometimes have a specific task assigned for a prototype. A lot of times we're doing a mechanical test where the final MVP wouldn't look exactly the same because you're just trying to do one type of test. And you may want to have more functionality than you maybe need at the end. And this is just to have that full range of functionality, go above and beyond what you're trying to do, and then start cutting away what it is you don't really need, or it's nice to have, but not necessary, and then pare down to that minimum viable product. So yeah, I think there is a difference, and I think there are a number of iterations that go through for what you consider a prototype. And we can talk about this. I know there's a couple other topics. I can talk a lot more about specific elements of that. But yeah, I think you start with a prototype and then cut your way down to an MVP.
And so, specifically in your work with Michelle, because you're generally working with kind of ideas coming out of research, and it's a pretty early stage. Like, what would you, again, super ballpark, are you 50% prototypes and 50% MVPs? Are you almost always working on prototypes at the early stage? Is it just kind of all over the place and tough to assign even a value to that?
I would even say like 80-20. I think it's mainly prototypes because we're on the very early, it's like the first set of data that we're getting collected on an idea. And we're still learning a lot about how we get to solving a problem with a particular method that the device is enabling us to do. So we're on that heavy on prototyping, and then maybe just maybe we get to an MVP at the end of one or a couple of projects as far as different grants go. And really that makes it that MVP poised for more funding and just starting up a company, getting some real company formation funding versus research funding.
So kind of building on that, Abhishek, and you kind of gave your history. When would you say you moved from having a prototype to focusing on I'm not trying to build prototypes anymore. Now I'm trying to build MVPs. When did that happen specifically with your sensor, and kind of what did it look like?
absolutely. So, I look at prototyping versus MVP. I think it's kind of like all in the acronym. For MVP, it's already says it's a minimum viable product, right? Which means you're looking at a form, fit, and function. Of course, it solves a problem, but MVP to us is actually already you're ready to hand it over to the customer. It might not have all the features, it might not have all the specifications, but at least it should have the bare functionality. Prototype, on the other hand, it satisfies a couple of, maybe it has its own purpose. It could be in your lab, it could be in customer's lab, but nonetheless, it's kind of a prototype. It should demonstrate the functionality, like the basic functionality that you're trying to prove. Like, for example, I'm giving an example. If it's a sensor that we say it can detect XYZ chemical, it could be a chip and put it on a rig, all wires going to a handheld, like going to a benchtop device, and you see the current or voltage changing. And that's a proof of concept that it's alive, it's detecting the gas, what you're detecting. But I can't sell that, neither I cannot put it on the hands of the customer. So the point you switch from a prototype to MVP is hopefully a customer from the company, maybe in universities a little bit different from the company, we have done prototyping in the lab, we have collected the data, the customer has seen the data and says, hey, we are ready to evaluate the MVP, right? So then we build all the sort of the functionalities into a form factor that the customer is now ready to evaluate, and we hand it over to them. That is the point. And preferably, and this is where I think the distinction lies for us, and it's really, really important for a company's standpoint and life cycle, is that hopefully the MVP generates, even if it's the smallest amount, some revenue. The customer should be able to ready to say that, yes, I'll give you small amount of money, nothing big. It's not going to be like $1 million PO. Maybe they will say, yeah, it's a small evaluation POC. If you can produce something that will fit in this form factor, can go on this, can be connected to wall plug, and I will see the data on my phone or a laptop or USB, whatever, right? And that's, I think, for us, that's the distinction, like from a prototype to MVP.
Yeah, I like that. I just kind of want to reiterate that. So I'm hearing kind of the two things. What makes something an MVP is, one, you're fine to hand it to a customer, right? It's not, it might still be ugly, it might still not be anywhere near finished,
Right.
but it's not like a bunch of wires on a bench. You can hand it to a customer, and they might even hand you money in return for that product, and that's what makes it a minimum viable product as opposed to a prototype.
Really, because that's what it is. It's a minimum viable product that you
Uh-huh.
can get some revenue out of it, right?
Okay, cool. So I think we're going to dive really deep into the MVPs, because I think that is, yeah, when we're talking about the startup stage, like that's where you're switching from just something that you're testing and trying to find a proof of concept to actually, building something that can be sold. But before we make that pivot, back to Kevin and Abhishek, help jump in if you want to. Is it ever too early for someone to approach you to try and build a prototype? Do they ever come and you're like, hey, you're not ready yet? Is there kind of a list of things that they have to be ready before they start prototyping? Or should they be, are you seeing the opposite end of it? Are people coming to you and you're like, you should have come to us, months ago to build a prototype?
I think it's more the latter. I don't think I don't think it's too early. If they have a problem, because we're very much problem driven, where we're not trying to take a technology and apply it to whatever, we don't have a fancy hammer and trying to find nails. We're trying to solve specific problems, and then we look around at the current state of the art and various technologies to bring to bear on those problems. And so a lot of times clinicians are just dealing with challenges in their practice and coming up with certain ideas, or just saying, I want a way to solve this. And we try to build something. So I don't think it's ever too early.
Okay.
And if they have a disclosure through the university, that's great. We sometimes come up with a few more ideas, and then we talk about, adding to that disclosure, doing a new one with maybe some novel technologies that we come up with. But yeah, I think if you've got an idea to solve a problem in the medical space, come reach out to us. We're happy to have a discussion. We have what we call a jumpstart program for university personnel, where we get 8 free hours, or we give 8 free hours of work on an idea. And we just we sometimes come up with a prototype or two in those 8 hours, depending on the complexity. So yeah, I don't think it's ever too early to come reach out.
Awesome. And if you don't have a disclosure with the university, I can help you with that. So feel free to reach out to me. I'll make sure I drop my email in the chat. So kind of sticking with you, Kevin. So it's never too early to come to you. But then kind of like Abhishek mentioned, his kind of like tipping point for something becoming an MVP. At the Fischel Institute, you're involved in commercialization. Have you found that the people who are working with you are the ones who are like, okay, I'm ready to start changing this prototype into an MVP, or are you the one making that recommendation? And kind of how are you looking at it, being like, hey, we've prototyped this enough. Let's take that next step.
I think it comes down to the PI, the originator of the idea a lot of times. And it's important to have a real champion on the clinical side to push this forward, because me as an engineer in the Fischel foundry, we can only push it so far. We can't start up the company in our lab.
Mhm.
We can create the foundation for a company as far as the product or the prototype. But at some point, someone's got to pick up that ball and keep moving it forward. And so, yeah, I think the person who comes, the inventor, has to at least be committed to saying, we will have some prototypes generated, some maybe an MVP made, but then that needs to be, you got to find the business folks that are going to keep moving that forward, or that doctor or nurse is going to have to really take ownership of this and push it forward, because it's going to take a lot of effort. And I think most people know this. And sometimes you get really, really lucky and find a CEO or someone who's ready to take it on, or just find someone who wants to acquire the technology and then just run with it. That, in my experience, is very rare. You're going to have to really, really nurture this thing for a while, and keep moving it forward.
So kind of continuing to build on that, you've got a PI, they've, you know, had all these successful prototypes built, they're ready to take it, they think they've got a market for it. When they start developing that MVP, how do you determine, you know, what features are important to have in the MVP? And then we talk about like feature creep, right? Like sometimes you want it to be able to do everything, but for that minimum viable product, like we said, it's minimum. What is minimally, how do you determine what is minimally viable? And if you could share, you know, just generally, but then if you also have some specific examples you want to dive into, if not, that's fine, because I'll ask Abhishek the same question, you know, with your product, how did you determine what needed to be there for it to be minimally viable? And what were you okay cutting and leaving for a later iteration?
I think one really big avenue to answer that question of what makes it minimal or minimally viable is through the I-Core program, where you get, through customer discovery, an idea of what the market is really looking for and what they can do with and what they can do without. And finding that real niche and then that value proposition where you're saying, my device is solving this problem very well, and get rid of the other accoutrements that nobody's maybe that interested in, or it's not going to make or break the purchase decision-making process. So I think I-Core is huge, and getting just getting down to, on the clinician level, what is driving them crazy with the current status quo and what this device is solving. That's I think another big driver to say, you know, this is the function set that we have. And then, you know, I don't get too much into the dollars and cents of it, but as far as like the cost of the technology or the device, and how much additional features would add to that bottom line cost, I let the business folks deal with that. That's a little bit after our you know, role in this whole process. So yeah, I see this much more on the end user's needs and what they want to get out of the product.
Okay. And for folks who aren't familiar, I-Core is a NSF-funded program that allows researchers, and actually just it's open to all types of individuals, but it was designed for university-based research to do customer discovery. And so what that means is they take you and you go out, and for the regional program, you do 20 interviews with potential users of your technology, and you don't tell them about your technology. Maybe just minimally you explain what you're doing, but then you just listen to what they're doing. And like Kevin said, you hear what their pain points are and what they're paying for and what they're doing to try and solve the problem. It's a fantastic program. The University of Maryland is the Mid-Atlantic region hub. If you go through the regional program, you can qualify for nationals, which means you get to interview 100 people, lucky you. But you also get some funding to do that, and you get just great answers on again, what your product's actually going to look like in the market. Instead of having to base it on hypotheses and best guess, you hear from potential users what your product would do for them. And so it's a fantastic program, and we highly recommend all of our innovators go through it. I appreciate Kevin bringing it up. But Abhishek, for you, you know, what did you determine to cut what wasn't necessary for your MVP. I know, like you said, your sensor is at this point more than just a sensor, right? It's a connected software network, and there's handheld device and all those things. Like what did your MVP have and not have, and how did you make those decisions?
Sure. So the way I look at it is, the MVP, of course, should clearly demonstrate um, its utility, right? So hopefully you're solving a really big problem for the customer. So as long as the MVP can demonstrate that you have tackled the biggest pain point that you're trying to address, that's a win, right? And it should be evident, right, to the customer right away. So for example, I'm giving an example. So when we launched our early wildfire detection ground-based network systems, right? So we didn't have all the software, fancy application, web tools to visualize the data. So all we could do is put the network. Of course, the network is operational. You put the sensors, they're connecting, sending data. You have the AI on the cloud that's running. At the end of the day, customers, we're showcasing it to city managers, fire departments, FEMA, Federal Emergency Management Authority. They don't care about your sensor technology, neither they care about AI in the cloud. All they care about is, can you detect the fire and how fast you can tell me? So we put the sensor network up, and we just opened up a laptop, and we showed through like a dashboard, a simple dashboard. Okay, you started the fire here, and this is what the network is, showing, right? So at least it shows the end to end, the problem that you're solving. That was our MVP. Fast forward 12 months, we developed a really nice, simple to use dashboard with all sorts of features like, geospatial imagery, then a companion app, like a mobile application that you can download, set up alerts and all of that stuff. So we added all of that. And of course, we also added a few features to the hardware system as well. So I would say that's kind of this distinction, right? So MVP to us is you have demonstrated that it can do the biggest functionality that customer is going to solve the pain point, the customer you already know, the customer asked you for. And it should be able to convey to the customer that how they're going to use it. And it might not be fully ready. The softwares or all the features might not be ready. And as you deploy the MVP, this is the whole point, that you would be able to learn, because your ultimate goal is to solve the problem and make the customer really happy and make it such simple and easy to use. So as you deploy the MVP, hopefully what the feedback you're getting is how to make the product really, really simple and easy to use. And what we have seen sometimes, what happens is, as engineers, and I'm guilty as charged, we want to build in more and more and more and more. Turns out, first of all, as a company, your main job is to be profitable, right? That's one. So you actually cannot put in so much stuff into one product that it becomes almost hard to, or too expensive to sell. And it's kind of, sometimes it's hard to understand where it's the stopping point. And the second point is, on the flip side, like I said, you have to, at the end of the day, walk in the customer's shoes, right? It's hard to digest, but a customer at the end of the day does not care about the cool technology, right? Unless it's another nerd like me. Why? Because all they're buying the product is to solve a problem. If the problem is solved by a hamster on a wheel and it costs, less, I'm sure they'll buy that. So that's the whole point. So the way we designed from MVP to the Gen 1 is, MVP was maybe a little hard to use. Gen 1, we actually dropped some of the features, but they made the product even simpler to use. Almost it appeared simpler than the MVP. It had no power buttons because we didn't want customers to turn on and off and get confused. It was software configured. You plug in the solar panel, it would automatically turn on, connect to the network. Customer did not need to understand anything. So from the MVP deployment, you learn all those things. You take some things out, make it easier, make it better, and go sell it again.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you. I think uh, all of us as humans, and especially humans who have like chosen to go into like research, right, are very much on this like make a good product and get it out there and make it the best product and get it out there and don't put out something that's crappy, right? And I love that your MVP, one of your biggest learnings was that it had too many features. It had an on or off button that wasn't necessary, and you actually needed to even scale it down to make it simpler for the next iteration. So that's awesome. Kind of Kevin and Abhishek, both of you, I think you kind of mentioned this, but Kevin, if you can think about are there any other mistakes or problems that you've seen people make with their MVPs. And then with the MVPs you've helped develop or the ones that you developed kind of for your own projects, what are some of the things that you've learned? What are some of the specific examples of things that they've taught you? Kind of like Abhishek just said about you don't need an on button, right? It was making people's life more difficult.
I guess like I'll start with the second part.
Okay, sorry, yeah, go for it.
The the one thing that I always run into is making something way too small, way too early. You're going to be tinkering with things in the prototyping phase. Packaging is something that can be really specific to the final elements that you're putting into, let's say, in a medical device, it can be a whole bunch of different applications. We have things that are meant to sit on top of an exam table. We have things that are meant to go into a small blood vessel. So varying scales of objects that we work on, but there's all these things we got to put into those various size boxes. And eventually you're going to get there, but you got to do some tests beforehand. And it makes no sense to try to cram everything into a really small container early on when you're still learning. So, and then if you got to make adjustments or changes, which you're going to have to do, you want to make the ability to make those changes quickly on the benchtop when you're doing testing much faster. So very much in the early, I'm talking about development phase here still. So everybody wants to try and shrink it all down to a fancy looking object very quickly, but until you get a good sense of what it is you're actually trying to do, you don't really need to burn yourself out trying to do all this miniaturization too early in the process. So I think that's the one kind of mistake that I've made a bunch of times. I still do it, and I got to take a step back and say, look, we can be a little bit larger here and scale it up a little bit, and then once we're happy with where we are, we know exactly what we need to have. Then we really start to shrink it down, and then also look at manufacturing ability to manufacture at scale. And what was the first part of your question? Sorry.
I think the first part was, yeah, what are some common mistakes you see when developing an MVP? And I think you answered that. Making it too small is one of the common ones that you see.
Yeah. Too small, too early.
Too small, too early. Okay. Abhishek, any other kind of with your MVP, were there any other mistakes that you made?
Yeah, so one of the things that I think we didn't get to talk about, which for a company, makes a pretty big difference, right? So one of the things, it might be kind of good to consider that production, right? Because hopefully when you are actually developing an MVP, you've already proved the concept, you have proved to yourselves and to external customer that you're solving a problem that somebody is willing to pay for, right? And hopefully you'll be able to, grow, scale the company for production. So sometimes, when people make MVPs, we don't think about how this MVP is going to go into production, right? Because production, from MVP to production, it's a different beast. Making 20 versus making 200 versus making 20,000. I mean, the size of the beast just keeps exponentially growing, right? So it might appear that, okay, it's too early. And I agree that not overly complexing the MVP, not making it too small, not adding all the features is essential. But also one of the things that is super important to think about, which, will come and bite you, is that you start thinking about how the people are going to use it. and how this product can be produced and will be produced at scale. What are the challenges? So just to being cognizant about that and not making some really almost like blunderous mistakes. So then when it goes into production, you say, by the way, this does not work in full production. So you have to completely redo it, spend a lot of money, time, money, effort, engineering time. So that's some of the things that we kind of think about in production, how this will be solved, and also the cost. Like, of course, no one worries too much about cost of an MVP, but you still have to understand that if you use something to build your MVP that is like super, super expensive, and you actually don't know in your head that what is the replacement when it goes into production, might be a problem, right? Because you also don't have enough time in your hand from MVP to a fully scaled product unless you have like, hundreds of millions of dollars waiting in the bank. You have to turn that around pretty quick to generate revenue, right? So just to think through in production and at scale, the cost, the challenges that you will face, thinking them ahead, brainstorming them, having that information ready. I think it's kind of important, right?
So, you've talked about, and I love that, thinking about like, yeah, don't worry too much about it, but you've got to keep it in your mind of how much is this going to cost if we scale it. What are, as you're trying to figure out what to cut from the MVP, how to make it, like what are the lessons that you're trying to learn from your MVP, and how are you tracking those? Do you write down like a list of the hypothesis that you're testing? Do you build an MVP just to answer one specific question? Kind of what are the key learnings that you're trying to take away from an MVP, and how do you check to see if you've learned those things? And I'll open this to whoever wants to go first.
I can kind of sort of almost walk you through very recent examples of, I mean, we did MVP on multiple products and then, took it to full production. That includes both hardware, software, mobile app combined together, the full ecosystem, and then improvements on future generations, right? So what is interesting is, of course, like when you're building MVP, hopefully you have interacted with the customer enough to know, again, what is the minimum set of features that will do the job for them to say, yeah, this seems like I can use this and I'll pay for this if you do additional this. So that's your minimum done. What happens is sometimes, like, again, I cannot emphasize this enough, right? You as a manufacturer or engineer or designer care about the technology. User does not. That's bottom line. It's harsh, but that's what it is. So if you go back and present to the user or customer a list of very technical questions, they might not give, first of all, they might not be able to answer them that would actually help you to decide what features to keep, what features to kind of get rid of. So what we do is rather than frame the questions, we kind of use a process that's something in the middle. We frame the questions and understand how they will use the system. Essentially, their daily interaction with the system. If they say, by the way, I wish the system could have like the software could have a feature which would do this. Okay, we learn it. We kind of record that ask. And then we keep kind of soliciting kind of these Q&A from our answers from the set of questions to multiple customers that are already being using it, and form like a summary document. That's kind of your next gen feature sets that customer wanted, right? If you pose the question, if you phrase the question, by the way, we are planning on adding this, and it's a very technical description, they wouldn't know what to do with it. Rather, our questions are always, tell us like, okay, if you're doing these type of like activities on our system, what is missing? How can it make it your life easier? So they will tell you, And sometimes, of course, this is the intermediary, like the product engineers would listen and they say, I think if you can provide this, that will provide them with the solution that they're looking for. Sometimes you have to take what they're saying feedback, distill it down to a product feature, and then go back, maybe perhaps show it to the customer saying, by the way, I know you asked for this, but will this solve the problem? And then hopefully close the loop. And if you do that often and you do that frequently and effectively, I think you can be extremely competitive and kind of like be the leader in the market. Because another thing is, like if people think that building a product is one and done, it's never that. If you want to be successful in the market and keep leading, hopefully in your industry sector, unfortunately or fortunately, you have to constantly evolve, adapt, improve. So MVP to Gen 1 to Gen 2, and then whatever, it just goes on and on and on. And to having a process that allows you to kind of bring the customer feedback, distill it down to some requirements, put those in, then showcase it back again to the customer. Having that iterative process, I think it's kind of super helpful.
So iterative process, kind of listening to the customer, figuring out kind of how they're using it and what features. Almost reminds me of the quote attributed to Henry Ford, but which he never said. But if I listened to the customer, I would have made a faster horse, right? But kind of figuring out how to figure out what they want without letting them kind of be all the way in charge of that. Kevin, yeah, how do you, when a PI comes to you and they're working on an MVP, how do you help them to figure out what they're trying to learn and then codify that learning?
I don't have like a specific matrix of questions or anything that we do in preparation or when we're assessing an MVP. It's really just getting to at some point, getting our prototype or MVP to the point. I'll give an example of like a catheter application where we're doing some sort of trial and we are just observing what's going on, what's working, what's not working, how is the catheter being deployed, how is it holding up to the stresses of just handling and the process that we're working on, and just recording those observations and then taking them back and then improving upon those things. And they're not always things you can put a quantitative number to or some sort of spec. It's just the form and fit of something, intangibles that you have to really be cognizant of and then make changes, maybe some very minor changes, but they really impact the overall effectiveness and how comfortable someone is using the device. For different types of devices, it's a little bit different. It's because, maybe a nurse is doing it. Your goal is really increasing workflow in a pediatric clinic, let's say. And so we're looking on that one, maybe on a more quantitative level of how quickly we can process a patient with a particular measurement. Or our device is trying to consolidate measurements of a few different attributes. And so that's something that we can, through a clinical trial, measure and then get that information back and then use that to drive changes. But yeah, I think, like Abhishek said, customers aren't concerned with the technology. They just want to make their lives easier, and whatever we can do to tweak our device to help with that under the hood, that's great. But they're not going to be the ones, the customers aren't rarely going to be the ones suggesting that tweak in the technology or that design change.
This almost feels full circle in our conversation in that it sounds like kind of with an MVP, What you're learning is more how your customer uses it, more so than with a prototype where it's providing you with like the technical of what can this thing do, right? And with the MVP, you're actually looking and seeing this is what the customer is doing, and this is what they're not doing, and this is helping them to accomplish or solve this pain point or it's not. It kind of reminds me a workshop I did a couple weeks back where they talked about at the Mayo Clinic. They had the nurses had to sign in whenever they visited patients, and they said it was taking too long, and the IT team cut down the time, and they said it was still taking too long, and the IT team cut down the time, and they still said it was taking too long. So finally somebody went in and observed, and the computers were all facing the wall, and so the nurses would have to come in and turn their backs to the patients. And so no matter how long it took, they kept feeling it was taking too long because they were turning their backs on the patients. And the fix was not to fix the software, but to turn the computers around on a table so that they could be facing and talking with the patient the whole time. And so it's again, how is the user or the customer using this? And that's why an MVP is so important, because it's a product you put in the customer's hand and you can collect that customer feedback as opposed to just, Abhishek used the word nerd, so I'm going to use it here. Just the nerdy, like it does this or it doesn't do this, and it checks, my boxes here. We're entering kind of the last 10 minutes we have for this workshop. So kind of closing statements from both of you. Any advice or stories about MVPs that you want to kind of share with the group? And then I've got one question in the chat. It's a specific question about M5 sensors. I'll ask Abhishek, but if any attendees have general questions, please share, and we can do some questions from the audience. But Kevin, you came off mute, so I'll let you kick it off.
Yeah, I think nowadays it's there's a lot of companies out there that enable really fast prototyping, meaning fabrication of objects that beyond what we can do in the Fischl Foundry, for example, where we have a CNC capabilities and 3D printing. But there are companies out there where if you send them a design file, you can get parts back in days, not weeks, not months, a lot of times. So you can really accelerate this iterative loop with the right team and folks that can accelerate the development and go through these different design changes. And so it's a great time to be in this field where you can quickly develop a product, get it to the point, in the case of a medical device, into an animal trial or some other trial, get in the hands of the users, and then get feedback and just build something that would otherwise in the past taken years. You can really compress that time frame, and it's just really exciting. And we use that we to be able to make some parts outside the university, but still have the capabilities of tweaking something or building it within our own lab. Really gives us a whole bunch of power to develop products in a whole wide spectrum of applications.
Then, yeah, any closing thoughts?
Yeah, so it's a great conversation, and I think Kevin said perfectly is that now is like really awesome time. Like what it would take us for years now, using these different design like machines and prototyping capabilities, 3D printing. Then there are companies like there's a Maryland company, Geometry. They can actually turn prototype into volume products. I mean, they have the supply chain, design, manufacturing, everything. And of course, with now with all these AI tools, you can even code pretty rapidly, right? And deploy it on different platforms. So my lesson that I have learned over the last almost 10 years of developing products to almost a solution, like we always think we should always start thinking from the solution. And there's a reason for that, because again, as a company, your main goal is to, provide a value to the customer, solve a big problem, but also maximize the return for yourself, right? And the only way you can do that is if you provide a solution. If you provide a components to someone else, the value that you're creating is smaller versus if you provide a full solution to an end customer. This is how I think. Of course, there are exceptions. Like some cases, it makes perfect sense for the business to provide a component that goes into another bigger system, but I would always choose to solve a problem from the end customer so that I can capture the most value for the company. and it's never early to think about how you can solve that ultimate problem for that customer that would, kind of open up their wallet. So yeah, it's a great experience. And unfortunately, this is one of those things that you cannot just read all these things in a book. Unfortunately, you have to do it, learn it the hard way. Sometimes, of course, you can find people that can join your team that has done this before. That's phenomenal. But experience by doing it, it's of course is super fun, but also you learn so much by kind of like taking a prototype to MVP to production. So thanks a lot, Josh, for this opportunity.
Yeah, I really appreciate both those thoughts. Like you said, I think it is a unique time to be able to be doing this. We actually, uh, we had originally another guest scheduled to join us, the CEO of RPM Tech, which is a product development and engineering service and prototyping company in Forest Hill, Maryland. And so if you are interested in getting things developed, that's a great place to do it. Abhishek mentioned another Maryland-based company. Obviously, the Pichelle Foundry that Kevin Arum is at is a great resource for those of you who are on campus. If you're an undergrad or a student, there's the startup shell. There's a variety of maker spaces and things here on campus. But with the last couple minutes here, I do want to open this up to questions from the audience. Abhishek, I noticed that you had marked one. It was a specific question about M5 sensors. It said, can you monitor PFAS, forever chemicals in water or solids?
Um, we actually do not, at this point, we do not monitor contaminants in liquid medium, in water or some like whatnot. But as a matter of fact, we are working on an R&D project where we are looking at kind of modifying the tech to essentially, kind of do some contamination monitoring in water or liquid medium. So, yep,
Awesome. So we can say MVP forthcoming, maybe.
yep.
Great. Okay. I see a question here in the chat. Can you generalize? How do you decide what market niche to focus on for the MVP? For example, do you focus on the easiest market niche? Do you focus on the hardest market niche? Do you focus on the financially most valuable or viable? Kind of with your MVP, what part of your market are you choosing to focus on?
Is that for me or?
It didn't give a specific person. You spoke up, so there you go.
Yeah, so we always focus on, like I said, like not easy, the fastest path to revenue for a company. It's very, not a very, it's one of the main drivers because that kind of determines the success, follow-on success. So we would target a customer or a segment or a use case that is the easiest to sort of showcase and have the customer pay for it. So that would be the number one priority for us. I would not necessarily choose the hardest or the most financially valuable, because it could be that, because if it's most financially valuable, then you could be facing stiff competition, right? So that I would choose a segment or a market niche that's easy to enter, easier and most easily demonstratable, that you can demonstrate the value of your product, and also easier to get the first check from the customer. And then of course you can, once you have established yourself, generated revenue, you can go target the harder, bigger, more financially rewarding, segments or sectors of the market.
I think,
Kevin,
the only thing I would add to that is just one example of an idea we've worked on. It's actually, I touched on it in the last question, but the baby growth monitoring system. So we had one version of it, which was a all digital, where we were doing digitized measurements of height, length, head circumference, and plotting it on a growth chart on an iPad. But then there's also an idea that we had where, why don't we just simplify this to just, that butcher paper that they roll out on the exam table? What if we print a growth chart right on that and have a lot of the same functionality on the paper that the baby, this is for like, very young children from like birth to 2 years old. And so we would be able to quickly ascertain if they're within that range of the growth chart just by having that information printed on the paper. So that's a much lower barrier to entry as far as just production costs. More customers would be interested in using that. It doesn't have all the bells and whistles that we as engineers like to develop and use, but it still gets the job done. And there's a whole global health opportunity on that as well, where in regions with malnourishment issues, growth disorders are a bigger problem. So this is a much better fit to identify kids who may be having growth issues because of malnutrition or some other issues that aren't always the case, as much of the case as in developed nations. So making an MVP, we almost did a two-track system on that one, where we continued this fancier unit development, but also explored this simpler thing to get to an MVP really quickly. And we're now trying to deploy that, I believe, in India through a number of clinics there. So that's one thing where, yeah, that was an easy, I don't know about financially viable, but it was definitely easier to get it into the hands of the end user.
So to kind of summarize both of you, it sounds like easy is one of the top considerations, in part being because if you do the easy first, you can make the harder afterwards, and the easy can still serve the easy market and continue learning. And back to what Abhishek said at the very beginning, continue bringing money in from real customers and real feedback from real customers. Awesome. I noticed that all three of us were chatting answers just to ourselves to the other hosts and panelists. So I
was
copied
worried
them
about
and shared it with everybody, but those were some of the various companies we've shared. While we're at time, I really appreciate Kevin and Abhishek. Thank you for making time. This was a super fun discussion. Like I said, I had been looking at our workshops and we didn't have one on MVPs and prototypes. And so this is our first workshop on it. And so I'm happy to add this to our YouTube library. I know folks can reach you. Again, if you're interested in the Fischl Foundry, that's right here on campus. And Abhishek, I believe you're based in Gaithersburg or
Rockville.
okay.
Yep.
Rockville, Maryland. Great.
Yep.
All right. Well, thank you. Thank you both for your time today. And for everybody, wish you have an awesome afternoon. Enjoy the weather.
All right.
Thank you,
Everyone.
Thank you,
See ya.
Kevin. Take care. Bye.
Bye.